Welcome back to another episode of the Jasmine Star Show. My name is Jasmine Star. I am CEO of Social Curator, and my guest today is the one, the only, the ever fabulous queen. That is Patrice Washington. I have to let you know that Patrice and I have followed each other on social for a bit of time, and we had the opportunity to meet at an event that we were both speaking at. So we met behind stage, and we just caught up about 20, 30 minutes. And I just knew I had to be in this woman's orbit. It took us a hot minute to actually get on this podcast. I'm not going to lie. I was like, girl, I could book Barack Obama sooner than I could book Patrice Washington on those podcasts. But let me tell you, y'all, it is going to be worth the wait. Amongst many other things, one of the things that I just got to give a shout out is that in 2020, Success Magazine named Patrice one of 12 inspiring Black voices in personal development. Okay. Today, we're going to be talking about the 6 pillars of wealth. I actually heard Patrice speak about this at an event. Before I get into the 6 pillars of wealth, that is 6 pillars of awesomeness. Patrice, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
I am so excited to finally be here.
I know.
I feel the same way about you. Like, we got a chance to chat and I was like, I love this woman. And I understand why people have said for so long, do you know Jasmine Star? You should know Jasmine Star. Have you met Jasmine Star? And then when I met you, I was like, I see why. I understand.
And it's mutual. It's mutual. But here's the thing. Like I had said, is whenever people are listening to the podcast, I want it to feel like we are all like seated. Welcome to my professional podcast. We're all seated at the same table. We're all sat. We're all sitting at the same table. So in order for somebody to feel really welcomed at the table, can you share a little bit of, people are just getting to know you right now. Can you share where you got yourself and how you got here today? What's your backstory? Let's give it a little bit of framework, because if we're talking about 6 pillars of wealth, people are like, who dis? All right, let's dive right in.
So a little backstory is I'm also a product of Southern California. So I actually, as a senior at the University of Southern California, started a real estate and mortgage brokerage. I got introduced to real estate at 19, decided I would become a broker instead of going to look for a job or go to grad school during senior year, much to the dismay of my family, who thought I was nuts. But that business became a 7-figure business by the time I was 25. And that is a whole thing within itself. But I will say, being a first generation Belizean American girl from South Central Los Angeles, I literally thought, Jasmine, I had hit the jackpot and that my life would be smooth sailing, right? Like what could happen here? I'm living good. I'm eating good. I'm looking good until. So in 2007, when we first started to see the recession rearing its ugly head, I was pregnant. And at 20 weeks pregnant, I took a fall down the stairs that sent me into preterm labor. And when I got to the emergency room, they said, ma'am, I'm so sorry. This baby is coming any minute now. There's nothing we can do. And I did the only thing that I could do in that moment. I started to pray. I called and asked other people to pray. And what was supposed to be any moment actually turned into me being in the hospital for 10 weeks at Cedars-Sinai in Beverly Hills on hospital bed rest. And while I was on bed rest, every day I was watching the news, and the banks that I worked with every day were closing down left and right. And I had 16 loan officers and real estate agents on my team at that time, and they were calling me every day, freaking out. What are we going to do? My deal is falling apart. My clients are upset. They're threatening to sue. Like, they're saying we're negligent. Everything that could happen was happening. And here I am in the hospital on bed rest, with a monitor around my waist, monitoring the baby 24/7. And it was about 5 weeks into this day that my doctor came in and she said, hey, I don't know what you're stressing about, Patrice, but if you don't stop, you're going to leave here 2 years in a row with no baby. Because the year before, I gave birth to a son who passed prematurely after 5 hours in my arms. Same hospital, same floor. Mm-hmm. And Jasmine, that was the first time I understood what it meant to surrender. I always thought surrendering was weak. I thought it was about giving up. I thought it was because you weren't tough enough to tough it through. But that's when I learned that surrendering was actually about letting go of the control you think you have. Because it doesn't matter how good life is feeling, life is gonna life. It's not a matter of if, it's when. And in that season, that one was like, you got to let go of the control you think you have and focus on what's important, which for me in that season was my baby. It was not the business. It was not seven figures. It was not all the accolades that I was receiving really early. It was about, how can I bring this baby into the world in one piece? And so,
can I pause here for a second? Because I want to let something settle. Is surrender is letting go of the control we think we have. That is really, really, really hard. Looking back at that situation, knowing what you know now, knowing that surrender is letting go of the control you think you have. When you feel like you're trying to hold on to control, knowing good and well, because you've been there, done that plenty of times before, what are some of the tools of the trade that you're using right now? Like when you start feeling like, I got this in control, I'm gonna flex my fingers around this control. What are some of the things that you do and tell yourself to start letting go of those fingers of control?
one of the first things I do is walk into my prayer room and look at the sign that I have up that says, "Dear Patrice, surrender, thanks God." I wrote that out. I wrote that out like years ago, and I keep it front and center because I am a doer. I am a make it happen type of person.
Amen. Well, that's why we like each other. That's why it takes a queen to know a queen. I was like, oh, another woman who likes to do the work.
Yeah, I'm a make it happen type of person. So I, in my ignorance, sometimes just, feel like, oh, I'll just make it happen. And what I do though is when I usually get to the point where it's like, go look at the sign, it's because energetically, but also physically, I feel myself forcing and pushing and striving. Yes. And even a part of what I do now with redefining wealth is understanding that when I am being and I'm surrendered, things feel more in alignment and they flow. There is no forcing that I have to do. And when I remember that this is not about me, but for me, it's about what I was called to do and how I was called to be a blessing to other people. When I put the people first, that reminds me to get out of the way, because there's nothing that I have to fake or force or be phony with. It is, this for me is built on a strong, firm, not flaky, a firm foundation that is rooted in being authentically who I am. And when I'm just like, this is what it is, and I'm not going to force and push anything, it's like the world opens up over and over again. I feel so held and supported by something greater for me.
So, I'm privy to the story, and the story is the Cedars-Sinai the story didn't end there. It began there because you gave birth to a beautiful, healthy daughter who is just strong, fierce, like a mini version of you, empowering you, doing things. Now we get to a point though, where I remember hearing the story, and on stage you said something that stuck with me for months and months and months since you had said it. You had said that wealth, its truest definition is well-being.
Yeah.
Can you explain? Explain that. Break it down for us real quick.
Yeah. So moving that story along, lost everything. Let's just say that. Came out of a hospital with $400,000 of medical debt, no deals closed, exhausted savings. A year later, I go from a 7-figure business to scraping up change. My home forecloses and I end up in a teeny tiny apartment in Metairie, Louisiana. And I have what I call my come to Jesus ugly crying moment. And it's in that moment that I discovered the scripture, Proverbs 17:16. It said, "What good is money in the hands of a fool if they had no desire to seek wisdom?" And there was something about that moment that made me want to understand, well, what does it mean by wisdom? Because I'm smart. I read the books. I have the certifications. I went to USC and graduated with honors. And a lot of us confuse knowledge with wisdom. Knowledge is the information. Wisdom is knowing how to apply it. So a lot of things start bubbling up for me, and I started to go deeper and deeper. Well, what is wealth really? Well, when I went to the definition of wealth, for the first time, I didn't stop at the first definition I saw. Usually, if you go deeper and dig deeper, you can get down to the roots of where words really come from. And it was in that moment that I understood that wealth was not just money and material possessions. That's where we typically stop. But the original 12th century definition of wealth is a condition of well-being and happiness. And so here I am at one of the lowest points in my life. Here I am, earlier that day, I had chased the power man with my baby on my hip to turn our lights back on or her milk would spoil. Here I am for maybe the third or fourth month in a row dealing with an eviction notice. Here I am at one of the lowest points in my life. And something in me reading that says, you're not going to recover by chasing money and material possessions. You need to be well. And just because you've had access to money and resources doesn't mean that you were well. And not just health doesn't mean that you were well. And there was something about that season that made me start to dissect every part of my life and what I had thought about things and address childhood traumas and wounds and all the things. And so what I teach now from the 6 pillars of wealth and the work that I've gone on to do, getting certified in financial psychology and getting an MBA in behavioral finance, is understanding all of the other parts of life that impact our finances, even when we're not thinking about it. And that has been the thing that has caused me to not only rebuild, but go further than I had been back, then in that hospital room. It wasn't the money and material possessions. It was looking at all the other parts of my life.
Can I read something just to co-sign? Because this is not this is not a hot air. This is what you practice, with what you preach, and then watching you up close and at a distance, it's just who you are. You recently posted on Instagram, our culture teaches us to strive for money and material success, but without a strong foundation in all areas of your life, all that striving will be for nothing. You'll either struggle to sustain your material wealth, or you'll be too unhealthy and unhappy to enjoy it. Money is a result of understanding what you want and whom you have to become to actually receive it. Can you elaborate a little bit more? Because it was that last part. I was like, yes. And the last part, I was like, help us understand, who do we actually have to become to receive that?
I'll give you an example. So, one of the first pillars is the fit pillar. That is the first pillar. It's about becoming your best self. And one of the things that I share with people is oftentimes we are praying for success. We are praying for clients. We are praying for these mountaintops that we don't even have the capacity to sustain. Like if our prayers were answered today, ask yourself, are you truly in position to receive it? Like some of the people who are right now praying that, you have this fame and that everybody knows your name. Do you understand what comes with that? Because everybody knowing your name is not going to like you. Some people are going to naturally be annoyed by your anointing. And you're going to walk in spaces where people create rumors, make up stuff, have a whole... Are you yet ready to have the tough skin to deal with that? Are you ready to forgive people who will never say, I'm sorry? Are you ready, right, to forgive people? We hear that hurt people hurt people. In order for you to truly walk out your assignment, there's some stuff in your backstory that you may need to deal with. Are you ready to do that? If you're not, maybe what you're praying for is like off in the distance. Because one of the things that we say at Redefining Wealth, and this is Monique Coleman from High School Musical. She was on my podcast, on the Redefining Wealth podcast, and she said to me that she learned that your business will only grow to the extent that you're willing to heal. Your business will only grow to the extent that you're willing to heal. Now, for me, yes, now we can say Patrice's face is on the cover of 5 books and, she's done all this media and she speaks on these stages, and all of those things require me to be very visible, Jasmine. But it was not until I was 22 years old and started therapy that when I turned 25, I could finally look in the mirror without cringing. Because I had all of these stories because of how I grew up and things that were said to me, even by people in my family, that I was ugly, that I would hide out. I would be ashamed to take pictures. I didn't want to smile because I was told my lips were too big and my eyes were too weird. And I had all of this stuff going on, right? But my wealth, my tangible, physical, financial wealth today is connected to all of the work that I do in the world. I could not be this person before you today if I didn't do the work to heal some of that. So it didn't matter if I was praying that, I want everyone to see me. I was ashamed. I would still be doing things to self-sabotage that level of success if I did not go and get the support that I needed.
If you hear me typing, I'm out here writing notes. I'm writing notes because one of the things I don't like, so the first pillar is being fit. And one of the things I wrote down is your business can only grow in proportion to the healing we're willing to do. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
That's so good. That's so good. So if that's one of 6 pillars, do we have time to go through the other 5 or should we focus just on a couple? You lead the way. What do you think is going to be the most value to this listener who's like, listen, I can go through all 6, but then people get distracted if that's your experience?
What I feel in my spirit right now is 1. I want to do a little bit more with number 1 because I know that this is an audience of make it happen people. That's why they love you, Jasmine. They are like, they're going to go make it happen. The other side of the fit pillar is not just being mentally fit, is being physically fit. Now that's a conversation that a lot of us don't want, right? It's like, oh, I don't have time to go to the gym. I don't have time to walk. I don't have time to do this, time to do that. The other part of this is, I was in a season in my life where I was always praying, God, expand my territory. I want to take my message all over the world. That was me in 2014. And another time I ended up in the emergency room, and I promise y'all I'm not sickly and I'm not always in the hospital. But for the purposes of this, I had actually gotten food poisoning after going to a homecoming at USC. And I ended up in the emergency room. And, they come back, they're running tests, they're giving me fluids, and they're like, well, you got more problems than just food poisoning. And I said, young man, do not speak to me that way. I'm a grown woman and you shall not. He's like, well, you got more problems. Did you know that you are running on fumes? Like your hemoglobin levels for a woman of childbearing age, you're supposed to be like 12 and up. I was like less than 5. It's like, you're running on fumes. Your iron in your blood is so low. If you were any older, we would be rushing you to get a blood transfusion right now. If you got in a car accident and had any injury, you would bleed out quickly and die. You literally don't have enough blood circulating. Did you know? I'm like, well, how would I know? Well, are you often fatigued or exhausted? And I'm like, well, yeah, but I live a busy life. I'm always on the road. I just came off a book tour. Like I'm doing all of the things. I had normalized being exhausted. I had normalized being drained, fatigued, huffing and puffing. I couldn't walk up 3 flights of stairs without needing to catch my breath. I was not eating. It was like, I love what I do so much. I could sit there all day and not stop to eat. And I wore it as a badge of honor. I wore picking up food on the way to drop my daughter off or pick her up as a badge of honor. And then I was in a circle of people who literally would compete about who could be more.
Oh, the busy competition?
The busy competition. It's like we out here trying to be like Dominique Dawes or Michael Phelps of busy competitions. Like I got the gold medal. I got 18 gold medals for how busy I am. My busy is busy. Oh no. Yeah. Oh no.
Oh, we're saying all the mantras. Sleep is for suckers. I'll sleep when I die. We are. Oh, I haven't slept. I didn't sleep last night. I haven't slept in days. Oh, I haven't slept in weeks. It is who can be the busiest.
I'm a vampire.
Right. Who can be the busy? And we word that as who is more committed to their business.
That's right.
Who is more committed to their goals? Who is more, you're going to make it happen. When we say, oh, I woke up super early and I was asleep late and I got 2 hours of sleep. And that's the season I was in. And here I am saying, God, enlarge my territory. And I can barely breathe in this townhome that I'm living in because I can't go up and down the stairs without being exhausted. And I did it in the name of purpose. I did it in the name of pursuing my passion. And I'm running myself into the ground. All the while, if my husband at the time or my daughter got the sniffles, I would stop everything and make a doctor's appointment for them. But here I am, I would rather limp around, Jasmine, and maybe if I had time, diagnose myself on WebMD and then decide what over-the-counter thing I was going to do and keep going. But if it were and that a lot of women do this, a lot of us do this, we will prioritize everyone else and make everything else more important and then not take care of ourselves. And what I learned in that season as well, like you said from, my Instagram post, what I learned is what good is it to be doing all of this and I'm running my body into the ground and putting myself in a place where all the money I'm making is going to go towards prescriptions I can't pronounce. Is that the goal? Like, what I'm doing to myself is so that I can put myself in a position to then experience all of those damn side effects that they mentioned with all of these drug commercials, right? And they're like, oh, we'll fix this thing, but then you have 19 other things, because I won't stop and prioritize my health and my well-being when I already know now that the true definition of wealth is well-being. Okay, if I'm not well in my physical body, what's it for?
Okay, so somebody who's listening and they're like, I get it, Patrice, I get it. But you see, my business needs 1,000 things done. And what I hear you say is to slow down and be healthy. But if I slow down, I'm not going to get the thing that I want. What is the shift of narrative? What is the pathway to wealth? What stories do we need to stop telling ourselves? Because the temptation is like, go, go, go. And if we realize that we're going to go and we're going to like grind into the grave, okay, fine. But what do we do now to relieve us from the stress of it's not happening in the way that we want it and how we want it, when we want it?
One of the things that I started to lean into more was Parkinson's law. And Parkinson's law essentially says that the time that we give ourselves is the time it will take. And many of us give ourselves way too much time to do basic stuff. We create the narrative that like, oh, I need to take all of these hours each week to do these things in my business. Well, really, if you shaved off 5 hours from there and dedicated it towards you going for a walk, taking care of yourself, making that doctor's appointment, doing the things for you, the work will still get done because it's going to get done in the time allotted. For anyone who went to high school or college, you remember those last minute assignments? You may have had a month to do it. You've seen it on the syllabus. And then 48 hours before, you're like, oh crap, I have to write this 20-page paper. And somehow you turn it in by the due date because you know that if you don't, your professor's going to slash your grade in half no matter how good it is, right? Some people took the whole month to do it and they turned it in by the due date. And maybe you took the 48 hours to do it and you turned it in by the due date. Ultimately, it got done with the time that was allotted for it to get done. That's how I look at things now. I prioritize my work around me, around the things that matter to me. So my calendar literally has fit and then fasted cardio, workout with trainer, whatever those things are. My faith is a priority for me. So my calendar says faith, prayer, meditation, journaling, whatever. My family, people in my life. I just helped my niece move into college yesterday and I took the day off, but I blocked it from the day that she said, Auntie, I'm coming. I blocked it. Everything else that I need to get done will get done. But it also allows me to look at the stuff that like I'm doing that doesn't even matter. I'm just like sucking up my time doing things that really don't even matter, because truly 10-20% of our activity is what really moves the needle in our business. The rest of the time, we're wasting time and putzing around. We're making things pretty and not making them proficient. You know, like we want to do all the razzle dazzle and we're not focused on the things that really matter anyway. And when I started to prioritize myself, it made me really look at how much of the stuff I'm doing that I busy myself with is even necessary.
Can you share a personal experience or through your work at Redefining Wealth of somebody who prioritized themselves and found wealth? Because if we're going to be focusing on the 6 pillars of wealth and people are like, wait a minute, I'm going to schedule a 20-minute walk. Like, wait a minute, I'm going to schedule some meditation time. Like, talk to me about the pathway of getting fit to wealth. How are those two correlated and interconnected?
Oh, so much. So I do. Let's talk about Kathy. Kathy is a great example of someone who, since she's been following Redefining Wealth, which was initially just listening to the podcast before I worked with her as a client. Okay,
hold on. Let me back up real quick. So for those of people who are unfamiliar, Patrice has a podcast. It's amazing. People love her. She goes down. She gives. She also wrote a book as an extension. I mean, you've wrote multiple books, but one of the books that's right, Redefine Wealth for Yourself. yourself. That's right. Oh my God. Here's the thing, y'all. If you guys aren't watching the video, like Patrice just straight up, I bring up the book. She goes, whoosh. Like nothing more than a woman who is proud of her work. Be like, oh, this whole thing that I just have resting right here on my desk. Yes. Okay. So she breaks down these pillars in her book. And so when I'm asking about, the work that you're doing with redefining wealth, I wanted to make sure that people actually understood that you give. Then the book has become an extension and a foundation of like, hey, this is where we begin the conversation. The podcast continues to supplement that. And now we're out here talking about Kathy.
Yes. And I talk about her, funny enough, I talk about her in the book because Kathy was someone who started to prioritize her fitness. She actually talks a lot now about fitness. But when I first met her, it was like, not really a thing. And she talks about what prioritizing her fitness did for her. It increased her confidence. So when Kathy came to me, her work life was saying she had been at a company for 20 years and she knew that she was constantly over delivering, but yet being underpaid, and she felt invisible. Those were her words. And so she knew she was doing good work, but people were also taking credit for it. Right. So she was not actually reaping the benefit by getting raises and promotions and all those things. She was just kind of going along. So that fit pillar piece, physically fit. She started to focus on becoming physically fit and creating time for her. When you are in that space of creating time for you, you're not just, moving around and walking. You will be surprised at the downloads that you have when you are clearing your mind and putting everybody else out and all of their expectations and just doing something that makes you feel good, or it's a challenge for you. Her confidence started to come up like, oh, I'm looking good. I'm feeling good. People started to acknowledge, are you slimming up or are you slimming down? Like, what's going on with you? And it created a space for her to have more conversations. It created a space for her to talk more about herself, what lit her up, and people started to see her differently. So it was like her own affirmation. I have to do this because this is what matters to me. And I know this is the first step towards me going to the next level. But when we start to affirm ourselves, what happens quickly is that you'll notice that other people start to validate it. Now, it's not that you need their validation, but it starts to happen naturally when people go, it's something different about you. Even when we think about getting mentally fit, you may not parade around telling everyone, oh, I'm in therapy, I'm working with a life coach, I'm doing this thing, whatever that thing is for you. But the way that you start to respond to life circumstances, because now you have a new set of tools, it makes people go, how are you handling this with so much grace? How, like, you seem much more peaceful. I sense a calm about you, right? Now, who do we want to bring opportunities to? We want to bring opportunities to the people who look like they can handle it. You want to bring opportunities to the people who seem more confident. You want to bring more opportunities to the person who is strutting their stuff and not shrinking their shoulders. So it wasn't a matter of like, I have to go out and say all these things. We naturally start to embody like this next level energy. And for me, when I stopped hiding myself and I stopped, kind of like I'm the person in the background because I'm not the pretty one and all of that, it made people like lean in more and say, oh, I want you to meet so-and-so. Much of my life, my success has been built on connections and relationships that other people have said, hey, you need to know Jasmine Star. There's a lot of people who probably pitched you to be on this podcast. I didn't have to do that. We ended up in the same space and it was a natural fit, right? But that was a series of relationships, a series of connections, but they've come from how I've shown up over the years. And for me, the more I pour into this idea of being mentally and physically fit, I'm prepared because Jasmine, let me tell you, I could have met you maybe 5 years ago and I may have been intimidated. I may have been like, oh, her stuff is too big for me to be on. Doesn't matter what I accomplished. If I'm telling myself a story because I'm not yet mentally fit for where I'm going, I can create a narrative that will sabotage even the best introduction. And that all comes together to me.
Okay, so I want to point out a couple of things. Is that Patrice did not get face work done or facelift. She didn't reduce the size of her lips. She didn't have an eye lift. Patrice was the same Patrice and decided. She made the decision to tell a different story. Now, Kathy made a decision to do something she already felt called to do. This is not about weight. This is not physical beauty. This is about the action to tell yourself a new story. And the new story is the very thing that started attracting the opportunities we always wanted. Now, whether or not Patrice changed, it was an inner change that manifested in outward opportunities, which then led to her definition of wealth, AKA well-being. And so when somebody, and then Patrice just said it right now, she said she chose to tell herself a different story. Now, if we had met 5 years ago, I don't know the story that Patrice would have told herself, but we met a few months ago, and the story she chose to tell herself based on essentially the same accolades. Patrice is still the same Patrice. She's been writing books for more than 5 years. So the books predated her story by multiples. And now she just decided to say, I'm going to choose to tell myself a different story and show up differently. So Patrice, the question I have for you is for people right now who need to tell themselves a different story. What are 3 things as we kind of like end towards it? Because we're talking about, Patrice and I could literally talk for 10 hours around these things that we know are foundational, right? And so to get more information, you're going to go to her podcast, you're going to go get her book, and she's going to give a shout out in a second. But right now we're focusing on one of the 6 pillars, the one that she's just like, we got to start here. And this is getting fit of mind, body, and spirit. So when somebody is telling themselves a story, what are 3 things that you could say, baby girl, 3 things that you need to do to tell yourself a different story?
I love an exercise called the what if exercise. So I talk about this in the book where it's a practice I've been doing for years now. Whenever I feel myself getting anxious or I'm leaning into more fear or I'm having those old conversations, because let me tell you, this is lifelong work. This is not like, oh, I thought I fixed this in 2009. Like, no. You feel at new levels, some of the same devils creep up, some of the same old gremlins creep up. And so one of the exercises I do is I take out a piece of paper or I go on my journal, I draw a line down the middle of the sheet. On one side, I say, what if? What if is the fear? And so these are the things that are coming up that are playing these narratives and these stories in my mind. So it's like, well, what if Jasmine doesn't like me? What if we don't hit it off? What if she thinks I'm not as smart as her? What if, whatever the scenario is, we all have these things that come up, and you list out all the what ifs. And then on the other side, I call it the truth side. It's what is. Well, what is if Jasmine doesn't like me, boo on her. She is missing out on a great person. I could be a great friend and an asset to her because I know what I bring to the table. What is maybe if we don't click, she was having a bad day and it wasn't about me anyway. Like, I don't need to take everything so personally. What is, and I just come up with different statements to like counter the what ifs, because oftentimes it's in our head and it's going round and round and round and it's creating all this havoc. And when you write it out, you realize sometimes how silly some of it is, or you realize that like, you can get to the root of it. Like, but where did I get that idea from that people think this thing? And I just start to play with it and dissect it. And by the end of that exercise, which again, I find myself doing that at this point, at least every other month, there's something that kind of is like, it rattles me because I'm constantly growing and evolving and getting new opportunities and being in new rooms. So that's one exercise that has really, really been a blessing for me. I would say another thing about telling a new story is I like to write out the worst case scenario. I'm big on journaling and just introspection and, writing everything out. What's the worst case scenario? So let's say the way that I'm telling the story, let's say it really plays out. Like, let me get to the end of what this looks like. So there was a season in my business, for example, where when I had to lay off those 16 loan officers and real estate agents, I said to myself in that season, I will never be responsible for people again. Because I felt such pressure to continue to pay people, even when I couldn't pay my own bills. I was exhausting my savings, trying to keep everything afloat. And what I came to at that time was I'll never be responsible for people again. So then years go on, I'm building this new business, I'm building a new brand. and I'm exhausted. I am going towards burnout. I am doing all the things and wearing all the hats. And people are like, but you're making money. Why don't you just hire people? And I couldn't understand why I couldn't bring myself to do that until I had a revelation one day. And I was like, I remember when I said I'll never be responsible for people again. So what's the worst case scenario here? And the way that I wrote it out was, well, if there's another recession or something happens, I'm going to have to pay them before I can take care of Reagan, my daughter. Right. And so I realized my mind was really what was keeping me and blocking me from just starting to get support, is that my mind was going down that whole rabbit hole that I would have the same fate. So I was creating this entire narrative that was rooted in that one thought: I'll never be responsible for people again. It took 10 years before I truly started to hire on. So 2009 is when I had that whole moment. I'll never hire people again. I'll never be responsible for anyone again. And while I have been building a business for all these years, it would be temporary support or, a VA here and there. I wouldn't commit to having full-time employees. And it would be 2019 before I brought my first full-time employee on. And that was because I did a whole page of like, what's the worst that could happen? And I wrote out, well, the worst that could happen is if I bring someone on and there's another recession, maybe they'll be okay with going to contractor and we'll be able to work something out. Or I know better now, if I have to lay people off sooner, they'll be able to file for unemployment sooner and they can move on with their lives. And I started to write out all of these. We can tell ourselves any story we want. Like, we literally have the choice to tell ourselves any story we want. So when I start writing out what's the worst case scenario, I flipped it and I wrote out the best case scenario. And now I'm living in the best case. Like, right now I'm living with a team and getting the support, which only goes back to all the other parts, which is like, now I can take better care of myself. And now I have the space to do the things I truly want to do.
Okay, so first of the three things that you would do to tell yourself a different story is the what if versus what is. The second thing that you would do is to write out the worst case scenario and then come up with solutions for the worst case scenario. So you fully prepared. And then what you did is write the best case scenario. So you knew what you were aiming for and you were prepared for the worst possible situation. You became okay with that. You came up with solutions for it, and that empowered you to tell yourself a different story. So what is the third thing that we could do to tell ourselves a different story?
I would say for me, it's been looking at evidence from my past that I've made it, and it doesn't matter how big or how small. We have survived, as Steve Harvey says, we have survived 100% of our worst days. And even the seasons that I thought were the absolute worst, I survived and I learned lessons and I have great takeaways from them. So even when I'm in the midst of something that can maybe become an ugly story, it's like,
yes,
this is going to be a lesson one day. I've already survived hard things. There's nothing that has happened to me. Everything has happened for me. And I survived. I survived. And I think having those mantras and those reminders, I'm very big on what I allow in my energy, in my space. So what I'm taking in, what I'm watching, what I'm listening to, what I'm reading, I am so big on those things because they all come together to, I think, inform the story that I'm telling myself. And I look for evidence. If I can't find evidence of something working out extraordinarily well in my life, then I also look for evidence in other people's lives.
Oh, borrow the evidence. Borrow the evidence. That's right. Because if somebody else in a similar or even less than situation, if there is somebody out in the world who doesn't have what you have, has possibly less education, less money, less fortitude, less family, less support, and they could do what you want to do, then borrow that evidence. If somebody else is doing it, you can too.
For me.
Patrice, This conversation gives me life. It also gives me hope. It's such a good reminder. Those three things to tell myself a different story is I have seen worse days. I have seen 100% of my worst days. I have gone through the worst case scenario and I'm going to dwell in the best case scenario. I have listed what if and I have changed it to what is. If you don't like me, that's bad on you. Because if you don't like me, there's a good chance you had COVID because I heard it messes with your taste. Hey, I ended up seeing, that's not mine. I wish it was mine. I actually saw that yesterday on Instagram, but I thought it was good. We thought it was good. If you don't like me, your taste is off. We cool. It's your lost opportunity. These are all things that we have the capacity to tell ourselves. But in order for us to maintain and stay in control of the stories we tell ourselves, we have to start with the very first pillar of 6, which is to get fit. Get fit mentally, emotionally, physically. For those people who would like to go deeper with Patrice to learn more about what she does, her podcast is a wealth. Y'all are going to get drunk on the goodness that she provides. All out there, all giving, all great content, great applications, and great guests. And definitely check out her book. So I'm going to give Patrice a second to shout out herself, because if you don't talk about yourself, ain't nobody else going to talk about you. So thank you, Patrice. Where can people go to find you?
Thank you so much. Well, I would love for you guys to download the cheat sheet on the 6 pillars, and that way you can get straight to it and see what all the pillars are. That's at patricewashington.com/6 pillars. patricewashington.com/6 pillars. And if you want to dive into over 100 lessons in all of the pillars, these are those practical exercises like the ones that I shared here today. Those are in Redefine Wealth for Yourself, which you can find everywhere books are sold. And other than that, I love to play on Instagram. That is my favorite place in these social media streets. And I'm Seek Wisdom PCW. Seek Wisdom PCW.
Because there is a difference between wisdom and knowledge. Baby girl, thank you so much for being here. This was so worth the wait. It was worth the wait. You serve extraordinarily well. And I'm so happy that people are learning how to redefine their story to tell a better one. I appreciate you 1,000 times over. Thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine. My pleasure.